Hey guys, this is Dr. Aeronautics. I'm finally back in the cockpit where I belong. This is the DeltaGlider IV second tutorial. We are in a takeoff readiness state. We are going to cycle between takeoff and landing, basically run a traffic pattern. So we'll go from takeoff readiness to landing readiness using checklist 3 and checklist 5. Which is the ground takeoff, then part of the re-entry and deorbiting. And then we're going to land using part of the 5 re-entry and deorbiting checklist. Even though it says that it's only for re-entry and deorbiting, there's some landing stuff at the bottom of that checklist that we'll need to execute or we'll be in big trouble. So all I did was I loaded the landed KSC departure to ISS tutorial for the DeltaGlider IV. This is what we have loaded up today. It's using the Jovian Mining Corporation skin. One of the many skins that you can use for this. And when we come back for a landing, we'll go ahead and run our first autopilot. I'll explain the 2 ways that you load autopilots, and most importantly, how to cancel an autopilot once it's running. So for this, actually all we're going to need configured are those 2. We're also going to run through the con nav, and our radios are configured. So just to check, we go to the HSI, we want nav 1 on this one, and on this one we want nav 2, and we're configured for the traffic pattern. So let's make sure that we're in takeoff readiness. We're going to hit the D for display menu. You can also get to that by coming down here and pressing DISP. And then we're going to select 6 using this little keypad. And I'm going to select 1 using my keyboard. They're interchangeable.
Configuration correct.
Okay, and we are in fact in takeoff readiness state. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to our checklist number 3 for ground takeoff. Make sure that the EPU and battery are off, because we're going to disconnect. Passenger seatbelt on. These are double checks. Technically, you know, you can come through where the D61 is here, but these are important things that you need to check. Ejection seat armed. We're actually going to turn the windows filter off, because we're not going into space today. We did the D61. So, okay, this is where things start to go fast. We're going to apply full power, rotate at 160, pull a 10-degree climb, and at 200 meters per second, the gear will need to be up. Generally, as soon as you take off, it's a good idea to throttle down to about 50% throttle, because if you don't do that, you'll actually pick up so much speed that you'll begin entering the warning state where you will be in danger of breaking your landing gear. After takeoff, we're going to turn the hydraulic pressure off. This part is not applicable. We won't have to watch our fuel. We're not going to get that high. There is a turbo pump over here that you can activate. Basically what it does is it creates a little bit of a boost. It creates more, if I remember it, it leans the mixture rich, which is a little bit of an effect of an afterburner. It's kind of cool too. You'll hear it spool up, and then the volume of the engines will almost double. And that's really fun when you want to do a vertical to get out of the atmosphere, which is what you want to do with this craft. As I mentioned, the XR2 Ravenstar ascent is a lot different than the DeltaGlider IV. in the XR2 Raven Star, the idea is you want to go up low and slow because you can turn those scramjet engines on, and as long as you stay in the atmosphere, you can just keep feeding them, and they'll make your craft go faster and faster and faster and faster. So you want to stay just high enough that you don't cause excessive hull heating in that craft. But this one, the idea is you want to come out of the atmosphere at 50, 60 degrees, and then when you get to about 30 kilometers, then you could level off and begin ascending. The turbo pump is also useful if you get your calculations wrong. It's a little bit of a saving grace that if you find out, oh shoot, we can't actually stop in time. Well, if you add the turbo pump, it'll give you about 20% more power at the very end. I also forgot we need to reload this setting here to what we have in the scenario. And you'll see that basically what I've got is a Mark V with 320 kilonewtons, and I have a lot of fuel on board and a lot of oxygen on board. That's just the way that we happen to load it up. There's an additional way to take off. You can also use an autopilot. I'm probably going to demonstrate that in a tutorial or two. The autopilot will tell you when to turn on the autopilot. That's typically about 3 kilometers, or if you look here, it'll actually give you feet and miles callouts, 10,000 feet. The autopilot will actually turn itself off. This all is not applicable to it because it will be done in orbit. So what we're going to do is we're going to press D or DISP and load up the most useful screen for us, which will probably be the re-entry data display, because even though we're not going to be re-entering, this will be useful for managing heat in the sense that we don't want to be going too fast. It won't hurt us or anything if we do, but it's just wasteful. Additionally, it will give you various information on G loadout values. And you know what? One thing that I forgot to do, we have a maximum landing weight that we have to abide by, or it will cause destruction of the craft upon re-entry. So the maximum landing weight is 19 tons. We need to drop weight until we get down to 19,000 kilograms. And the way we do that is with a fuel dump. So if I press this button, what it will do is begin dumping fuel out of the craft at an excessive rate, which I'm doing right now. And that's going to lighten us up. This is incredibly wasteful. You never want to be doing this in real life, unless you're dumping a few hundred kilograms and you're coming up to landing. There are reasons why you would want to do this, such as if you needed to save as much fuel as possible until the very end, and once you know you've got it, then you can dump all your fuel. That's okay. I'm also going to close these retro and hover doors because we'll be doing atmospheric flight. I like them safeguarded against accidental opening. So what we're going to do is we're going to drain it out till we get right to about 19,000, and that will be fine because when we take off, we'll actually burn fuel, making us even lighter. So let's go ahead and wait for that to happen. Okay, we are almost there. While we're waiting, we can go ahead and test our warning light systems. And I'm going to explain a little bit about what's going to happen. Our ship is in what's called atmospheric auto control. That's going to limit us to the elevon and gear. In fact, you know what?
Rotation, translation, elevon.
I'm going to go straight to elevon. Here we are at 19,000. Press the fuel dump valve to cut it off. And we're done. So we're now below 19,000, which is landing weight, and we've lost 42% of our fuel in doing so. But we're not going to go very far. Anyway, what this is going to do is it's going to prevent the ship from switching over to RCS, which it might do if our flight gets too slow. But I want to disable fuel use because we are staying well in the atmosphere. I'm going to do a traffic pattern of 3,000 feet, which is a lot higher than what would be normal for an aircraft, but I want to keep it high enough because the craft tends to handle like an extreme fighter jet. The biggest difference in flying this craft compared to the stock DeltaGlider is the control surfaces, which we should go ahead and test now. Okay. Alright, everything looks good. When we reach about 40 or 50 knots, we're going to get a status message that the automatic air intake has opened. This is going to allow us to draw oxygen from the atmosphere rather than our onboard oxidizer tanks, which saves us a little bit of oxidizer in the long run. It also helps to cool certain systems and allows us to use oxygen contained in the atmosphere rather than with the craft. Okay, that is pretty much it. So, initiating full power in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, full power.
80.
Okay, auto air intake opened. We also
V1.
had, there we go.
Rotate.
Okay, rotating for 10 degrees pitch up.
Gear up.
Put the gear up, throttle back to about 50% gear. Okay, we're at 1,000 feet. We're at 193 meters per second, which is a healthy atmospheric speed. So right now we're specifically, wow, we're down to about 30% thrust. I've decreased that. Okay, so we're leveling off now at 3,000 feet, which is pretty much our traffic pattern altitude. I can adjust this using the trim gauge. This trim you can't click, if I remember correctly. Yeah, you have to use the insert and delete keys. So we're going to throttle back a little bit more. And while we're going, I'm going to explain this. So this first number up here is the quantity and percentage in the main fuel tank. And this corresponds with the percentage of reaction control system fuel in RCS tank. Both fuels are exactly the same, which means we can cross-feed them, and there is cross-feed capability. The mass of the total mass of the tank is displayed in the second number down, which is 5380, and the third is the fuel flow, the amount of fuel that is leaving the craft and being burned. That was about 20 when we were dumping the fuel. And then in the bottom you have the engine display. The blue bars correspond with the topmost number, which is the thrusting level in percentage. So right now we're at 27.2% main thrust, which equates to 87.0 kilonewtons of thrust, and it is causing a net acceleration of 4.65 meters per second squared, which is being counteracted fully by the atmosphere, and hence we are not accelerating at all. Let's go through our after takeoff checklist here. We're going to turn our gear hydraulic pressure off, and that's it. I'm going to cut main fuel because we've ascended a little bit higher than I had wished. And we'll go ahead and turn downwind now. We're making a right traffic pattern here. The flight capability of this craft is better at slower speeds. You can see we basically got down to about 130 meters per second squared, and we did not get ourselves into a stall, which is pretty nice. There are autopilots which we can demonstrate maybe the next episode about how to hold speed and how to hold altitude, so it's not as much as of a manual chore. And if you can look on the re-entry control display over here, it'll give us our current pitch slope. That might actually, yeah, that's not our current pitch. What that is that's measuring our current ground speed over vertical speed, and essentially that's our flight path angle. The angle of this actual crosshair here, the prograde velocity vector, is with the horizon, which is pretty handy when you're approaching. It also gives us our current atmospheric pressure, static that is, outside air temperature, which by the way is not 15°C, which is the standard on the surface. That's because we're at about 2,300 feet, so the temperature is 4 degrees Celsius lower. It will also give us our vertical acceleration. That's the pressure that you feel in your seat in G. Right now we're basically 1G, and the total G value anywhere is 1G. We also have a speed readout in kilometers per hour. Over here we also have miles per hour. Like I said, these crafts fly unbelievably fast. We're going about 455 miles per hour right now at about 2,500 feet. That's Mach 0.6, which is pretty crazy, and we're not even trying. Gives our current vessel mass here, and down here is the maximum G forces that we've accelerated thus far. 3.3 Gs, which is considered uncomfortable by most standards. Okay, it looks like right now we're pretty much passing our landing fix, so we're going to continue heading south a little bit more, and then we're going to turn westward to 240 degrees. Now is a good time to bring up the checklist 5 and figure out where we need to come in. So our ship control is not on atmospheric auto, but it's on elevon and gear, which is okay because we don't need RCS for re-entry. Let's see. D65 for re-entry. We're not running the re-entry programs. We have disc 3. All we need to do is turn our gear hydraulic pressure on, and final approach speed should be about 250 meters per second, and we'll lower that to 160 for touchdown. Okay, I think we can go ahead and make our turn now. Watch the G value as I make a sharp bank. We're pulling about a 2.5 G turn right now. In general, I would say once you get used to it, the flight dynamics of the DeltaGlider IV are a lot easier to fly than is the stock DeltaGlider that I went through the previous tutorials. It really is a lot easier. It's a lot more consistent too. Okay, we're getting close to the
Rotation. Translation.
Whoops, wrong key. getting close to the approach fix. And I managed to turn RCS on.
Elevon.
That's what happens if you hit the slash key, the / key on the numpad. That can happen. There is actually a way to disable that if you're interested. You just turn the RCS valve here on the fuel gauge off, and the RCS will not flow. Okay, so I'm going to go for 3,000 feet, our traffic pattern altitude, and get our initial approach fix coming up here. I'm using an instrument approach in this case, so you can see I have the ILS Runway 3-3 dialed in here. And our glide slope is somewhere between that of a 747 and the space shuttle, just about halfway in between. So just know that you wait a long time before you begin your power off glide in, pretty much. But you don't want to wait too long. It's better to add more fuel in than not have enough fuel to make the runway, or rather have too much, and then you can't come back in. I'm surprised that it lists 250 for final approach. Perhaps that's an initial approach, but I'm finding that 196 is actually fast. So we're pretty much at the glide slope right now. So we want to get lined up with the runway, put that prograde velocity vector at the start of the runway. That will allow us to flare properly. Below 200 meters per second, I'm going to put the gear down now.
Gear down.
Be ready on the comma and the period keys, what you're going to use to, okay, we're getting below our landing speed here, what you're going to use to stop the spacecraft. So just, again, keep that prograde velocity vector right on the start of the runway. Make sure it lines up left, right with the runway. Make little rudder adjustments as necessary. We're coming in at about 160 meters per second. We have a pretty good approach now. All right, now I'm going to focus my attention at the end of the runway, cut my fuel flow completely off, and watch my vertical speed as I'm coming in. You want to get that pretty low. Okay, we have touchdown. You want to apply the brakes right now. And when you come close to a stop, that was the automatic air intake closing. And we're now down to a taxi speed. Okay, and that's full stop. So I was pretty happy with that landing. Like I said, I've complained endlessly about how irritating the stock DeltaGlider is to fly. And being able to have a craft that is able to be mastered like this is very welcoming to my brain. So I like a craft that is created very well on information related to actual physical flight. Okay, now we're going to transition to the second part of the tutorial, which is our first autopilot execution. And I'm going to demonstrate that coming up. Okay, so for just about every type of operation that you can do, there is either a autopilot in existence or you can create one. So an example of an autopilot in existence might be a Mars re-entry. One that you might have to create might be orbital insertion of Triton or re-entry of Neptune. You know, crazy far out things that there's not really a need for unless you make it so. And there's information about the code behind this computer included in the documentation. I might do an episode on that, but that's really advanced, even for me. So you can create an autopilot if you like. I personally just find flying the craft physically I'm okay to do because I have experience flying. So we're here on the runway. We want to clear the runway and get out of the way. So what we need to do is we need to taxi off of the runway here. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, it looks like we're going to need to go down the runway some more and then turn back. I don't know if that's a taxiway or not. It's kind of a funky way that they have this airstrip design. We may have to swing a wide turn, but anyway, so what's involved in taxi? Two things, direction and speed. Now, you could do speed and direction if you could go straight forward, but that's not possible. You really can't go straight forward to our destination. If we went straight forward to this place here, we would essentially go right through a bayou, which we don't want to do. So we can't do direction, but we can do speed. So speed is an autopilot that we'll be able to run. So hold speed is something that is versatile. You can use it in the atmosphere, you can use it relative to a docked object, and you can use it on the ground. So we need to find it now, and that's going to be listed in the flight computer operations section of the checklist. So we're going to go out to checklist 12, and you scroll down to the section on programs here. The 200s, program 200s are attitude holds. Program 110 would be atmospheric flight, so basically an autopilot in a 737. It's that exact same thing. Again, like I said, there's stuff for everything. There's automatic docking autopilots that will actually dock you on an automatic sequencer. It's fantastic. And this is what we want here. NN hold speed. Where NN is the meters per second times 10. So the highest speed we can do is 990 meters per second for hold speed, which you might need in a light atmosphere such as Mars. So we want the lowest speed permissible because we're taxiing. So that's going to be 0.1 or 10 meters per second. So the way we do this is we're going to do D1 to display our program. And like the Apollo Disky, we're actually going to, actually there's three ways to do it. We're going to enter it in like we would the Apollo Disky, and then we're going to do it the keyboard route, which is much faster. And then we're going to do it a third way, which is a shortcut. So we want program 400 for speed hold, specification 01 for 10 meters per second, press enter. So now what that's going to do is that's going to load the program into the flight computer. And so we have hold speed, the program status is halted, and the speed setting is 10 meters per second, which is what we want. And we can actually use the numpad 1 and 3 to adjust the speed hold setting, which is pretty nice. Again, the keyboard method, you can press E or click execute. So if we press execute, we'll start rolling forward.
Hold speed autopilot engaged.
Okay, so it's told us that we're now under a hold speed autopilot. You'll also hear a beeping sound. You'll see the autopilot flashing green to let you know that we're under autopilot. You'll also hear it here. So how do you disable yourself, right? You want to stop. They might have disabled that feature. You used to be able to hit that. But if you want to stop, you can press the stop button. And you'll hear 3 beeps. That means the autopilot has disabled itself. Or you can also hit the space bar. So let me demonstrate this now using the other way. D1, and now I'm going to hit Pro. Hang on a second. I have to clear it with C. So do Pro 400 Spec 01. That's P400 S01. Enter and E.
Hold speed autopilot engaged.
And we're now moving. To disable, I press the space bar. And that's turned the autopilot off. Now there's a third way to do it. You'll see there are some program shortcut settings here on 7. This is for the most important autopilots that you need on in a moment's notice. So press 7, you'll see some of these here. Taxi hold speed, approach hold speed, flight hold speed, docking, atmospheric flight, ascents, re-entries, and some that aren't set that we could. So if I remember this correctly, you press it, it engages. So if I press Alt-1, yep.
Hold speed autopilot engaged.
All I had to do was just press Alt-1, and it brought the speed autopilot on. I might do that normally when I'm taxiing, but yeah, that's pretty much it. And the nice thing is it will actually vary our input settings. You can see the thrust setting here. If I set the brakes, it'll go crazy. And if I start turning where there's a little bit more friction, you'll also see a additional amount. And you might have remembered how much of a pain it was to steer the other DeltaGlider. Well, thank goodness this has a steerable nose wheel. And if that's not enough, then you can also use your brakes as well. But it saves you fuel using your steerable nose wheel. Okay, we're coming up to the point now, so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pull off the runway, and then I'll demonstrate parking. We'll park next to that building there. So steering is very easy with the DeltaGlider 4. All you got to do is just, if you got a joystick, you twist it. Otherwise, well, you can't really use number pad 1 and 3, because if I demonstrate, you can see it's now set the value to 20 meters per second. Better way is just to twist the joystick here. We have a very sharp turning radius. We can turn through just about anything. Which is why I really like this craft. So we're just going to pull off next to this building here. And once we get close, we're going to disable the autopilot because we are moving 20.5 miles per hour. So we've now coasted to a stop. That is now... I don't think I demonstrated this enough. It is halted, but we can resume it with E for execute. And disable it again with the space bar. To disload the program, you press C, or you can click clear. And that will unload the program. So now if I press E, it's going to throw an error because no program is currently loaded. So to taxi with a realistic speed, generally, as long as you're not carrying cargo and you're not super full, 10 to 15% works. And you can look at your speed in knots to get your taxi speed. Right now we're going about 2 knots, which is really good for parking on an apron. And we're parked, and if you look straight in front of us is Launch Complex 39A, where the space shuttle used to take off from, which is pretty interesting. So that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed. Next tutorial I'll be demonstrating a lot more of the atmospheric autopilots, how to switch between them, knowing which one to use when. And then the third tutorial, I think we'll do 2 ascents. We'll do the manual ascent so that you can understand how to do it manually. And then I'm going to demonstrate how to do it with the autopilot ascent. Which should be pretty interesting because that's actually how most spacecraft are controlled in real life.
Pitch all control off.
Such as the space shuttle. Thank you guys for joining me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.